student, welcome you to massive open online course on Indian economy. Today I am going to talk on the module Estimation of Poverty in India and its trends over time. In the last two modules we have discussed different approaches of poverty as well as methods of estimation of poverty in our country. As far as the measurement of the poverty in our country, they mainly followed three alternative approaches: monetary approach, capability approach and social exclusion approach. And we have also learned different methods of estimation of monetary poverty, multidimensional poverty as well as poverty following the social exclusion approach. The present model actually deals with the empirical facts of the poverty in India. After completing this module, you are able to learn the trends of the monetary poverty in India as well as some disaggregate level, trends of multidimensional poverty in India as well as some highlights of the socio-economic caste census to understand the level of deprivation of the household by different indicators. The module consists with six broad sections. Section 1 introduces the important measurement of poverty in our country. Section 2 analyzes the trend of the monetary poverty in our country by using different methodology. That is by using the MRP consumption, by using URP consumption as well as by using MMRP consumption. We will also discuss the status of the poverty across religion, across social castes to understand the intensity of the problem in our country. And section 3 deals with the trends of multidimensional poverty in our country. Section 4 highlights the level of deprivation that measured by the socio-economic caste census. And finally, section 6 makes the concluding observations. If we consider the estimation of poverty in our country, then we have noticed that there are so many methods and so many measurements of the poverty. By using these methods and measurement of the poverty, Planning Commission as well as different researchers were estimated the poverty at a frequent time interval. And this method of estimation also varies from one time period to another time period. And there was the mainly evidence of the estimation of poverty following the monetary approach. The Planning Commission, they measured the poverty by using the monetary approach. The measurement of poverty in our country varies from time to time. And there was the evidence of the measurement of poverty using monetary approach as well as multidimensional approach. The most of the estimation of the poverty that was used by the Planning Commission is mainly based on the monetary approach of the poverty. But these estimates of the monetary poverty are also not comparable because frequent changes of the methodology and definition of the poverty. In our country, the monetary measurement of the poverty based on the consumption expenditure survey of National Sample Survey Organization. And in case of consumption expenditure survey, the recall period of the consumption varied from time to time. And accordingly, we have noticed three alternative recall periods: URP, MRP and MMRP. URP means Uniform Recall Period, where the consumption items of each component that consumed by the individual are 30 days. Whereas in case of mixed recall period, MRP, some of the items for 7 days, some of the items for 1 year. In case of MMRP, mixed modified recall period, some of the item related with 7 days recall period, some of the items related with 30 days recall period, whereas the rest of the item, the recall period is 1 year. That is, the recall period varies from time to time from one consumption survey to another consumption survey. Therefore, they are not comparable to each other. On the basis of URP based consumption, Planning Commission estimated the poverty for the period 1973-74 to 2004-5. During this period, we are able to analyze the trend of poverty because here the poverty was estimated on the basis of the Lakrewala committee, and it is based on the URP recall period or URP reference period of the consumption. If we see the trend of the head count ratio means percentage of poor people in India, then we can see that this trend gradually decreases over time. Urban head count ratio as well as rural head count ratio gradually decreases over time. Urban head count ratio denoted by the red line in this diagram, whereas the trend of the rural head count ratio is denoted by the green line in this diagram. All the head count ratios either in urban or rural, they are gradually decreased during this time period. But if you consider number of poor, if you consider the trend of the number of poor, then we noticed that the number of urban poor gradually decreases during this period, whereas the number of rural poor seems to be declined during this period. That is, there is a contrasting features of the trend of the number of rural poor and number of the urban poor. If we see the detailed empirical facts of the poverty during this period, then we can say that in the year 1973-74, 54.9% people in our country were poor, which decreased to 27.5% in 2004-5. If we consider rural areas, then the head count ratio in the rural areas was 56.4% in the year 1973-74, which is also decreased to 28.3% in 2004-5. In case of urban areas, the head count ratio decreased from 49% to 25.7%. But if we compare the urban head count ratio with the rural head count ratio, then we can say that the percentage of poor people in the rural areas is relatively higher compared to the percentage of poor people in the urban areas. That is, the rural head count ratio during this period was higher than the urban head count ratios. But if you consider the number of poor during this period, then in the year 1973-74, 321.3 million people were poor, which increased thereafter to 328.9 million in 1977-78, and thereafter it decreased marginally to 322.9 million. In the latest year, 2004-5, by using this methodology, the estimated poor in our country was 301.7 million. But if you consider the trend of rural poor and urban poor, the trend of rural poor decreased from 261.3 million in 1973-74 to 220.9 million in 2004-5. But in case of urban India, in the year 1973-74, 60 million people were poor in the urban areas, but their numbers gradually increased thereafter, and in 2004-5, 80.8 million people were poor in the urban areas. That is, during this period, the urban poor gradually increased from 60 million to 80.8 million. And what is the reason behind the increase of the urban poor? Because the urban head count ratio gradually decreasing during this period. Urban head count ratio decreased from 54.9% to 27.5%. The main reason is that the urbanization and the migration of the rural people to the urban people. Due to urbanization, new rural area were converted into the urban area, as well as more and more rural people transformed into the urban area or migrated into the urban area. Therefore, the number of poor were relatively high in the urban areas. Now we see the trend of the poverty during 93-94 to 2011-12 following another methodology that is called Tendulkar methodology, and the Tendulkar methodology actually based on MRP consumption, that is modified recall period consumption, mixed recall period consumption, where the sum of the consumption basket, the recall period of the sum of the consumption basket is 30 days, whereas the recall period of some of the other consumption basket is 1 year. If we consider this measurement to measure the headcount ratio as well as number of poor in our country, then the estimate shown that the both rural headcount ratio as well as urban headcount ratio were gradually decreasing during this period. And as well as if we consider number of poor, rural poor as well as urban poor, they are also gradually decreasing during this period. If you consider some empirical facts, that is the total headcount ratio in India, which was 45.3% in 93-94 and which decreased to 21.9% in 2011-12. In case of rural India, the headcount ratio decreased from 50.1% to 25.7% during this period, as well as urban headcount ratio also decreased from 31.8% to 13.7%. In case of number of poor people in India, 403.7 million people were poor in 93-94 according to the estimation of the Tendulkar methodology, and their number gradually decreased during this period, and in 2011-12 269.8 million people were poor, which was estimated by the Tendulkar methodology. If we consider the urban areas, then in case of urban areas, number of poor, which was 74.5 million in 93-94, and it increased to 80.8 million in 2004-05. But thereafter, it decreased to 76.5 million in 2009-10 and 53.1 million in 2011-12. That is, after 2004-05, there was a decreasing trend of the number of urban poor in our country. Whereas in case of rural India, the number of poor was gradually decreased from 328.6 million to 216.7 million during this period. Now we consider another methodology that is called Rangarajan methodology, and this methodology mainly based on the MMRP recall period, modified mixed recall period, where the consumption basket, recall period of the consumption basket are 7 days, 30 days as well as 1 year. Therefore, this methodology is treated as the MMRP methodology, and this methodology was developed by the Rangarajan, by the expert group of the Planning Commission headed by the Rangarajan. In this methodology, they estimated 362.99 million people were poor in the year 2011-12, out of which 260.52 million people were poor in the rural areas and 102.47 million people were poor in the urban areas. And this estimation of poverty is only related with this particular year 2011-12. After that, there was no estimation of the monetary poverty, because monetary poverty is based on the NSSO consumption expenditure survey, and last survey was available for the year 2011-12. Therefore, after that, no estimation of the monetary poverty was available in our country. But Rangarajan committee, they have estimated the poverty across states also, and they observed that the monetary poverty was relatively high in Chhattisgarh, Manipur, Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Bihar and Assam, where the percentage of poor people were more than 40%. That is, these states are highly concentrated in respect of the monetary poverty in our country, and these states are also relatively backward in our country. Now we can explore the monetary poverty, that is the status of the monetary poverty, and this status of the monetary poverty actually measured by following the particular methodology, the Foster-Gear and Thorbeck methodology. This methodology is called FGT methodology, and this estimation was done by Das et al. 2021. Das et al. They have estimated the status of monetary poverty by using the FGT methodology, where the reference period is MRP. MRP consumption is the basis to measure the poverty in this approach. And actually they measure the status of poverty, not only the head count ratio, but also measure the poverty gap as well as the square poverty gap to understand the intensity, severity as well as the depth of the poverty. If we consider the status of the poverty in India during the period 2004-5 to 2011-12, because their estimation was only available for the estimation of the poverty during this period, then we can say that the head count ratio in the year 2004-5 was 37.8%, which decreased to 22.3% in 2011-12. The poverty gap as well as square poverty gap in all over India also decreased during this period. Poverty gap decreased to 8.8% to 4.4%, whereas square poverty gap decreased to 2.9% to 1.3%. If you consider the status of poverty across social caste and religion, then we can say that the percentage of poor, that is head count ratio, is relatively high for the scheduled tribes, followed by scheduled castes, OBC and general caste category. In case of scheduled tribes, 59.7% people were poor in the year 2004-5, which decreased to 40.6% in 2011-12. In case of scheduled tribes, the head count ratio decreased from 50.2% to 29.9%. In case of other backward castes, the head count ratio also decreased from 38.9% to 21.9%. In case of general caste people, the head count ratio was relatively low, and it also decreased from 22.4% to 11.9%. Similarly, the depth of the poverty, that is poverty gap, and the severity of the poverty, that is square poverty gap, were also decreased during this period across different social castes in India. Now, if you consider the status of the poverty across religion, then the number of people or number of head count ratio was relatively high in case of Muslim, which was 43.9% in the year 2004-5, which decreased to 26.3% in the year 2011-12. The head count ratio also decreased for Hindu community, which decreased from 38% to 22.4%. The head count ratio were relatively low for the Christian and other communities, and there was also the evidence of the decline of the head count ratio during this period. Now we come to the trend of multidimensional poverty. That is, we are now analyzing the trend of the multidimensional poverty in our country. Actually, the measurement of the multidimensional poverty in our country is mainly based on the National Family Health Survey data. And here we have considered a particular estimation made by Das et al. And they also measured the multidimensional poverty in our country by using the NFHS 3 and NFHS 4 data. NFHS 3 related with the year 2005-6 and NFHS 4 related with the year 2015-16. That is, by using this estimation, we are able to analyze the trend of multidimensional poverty in our country during 2004-5 to 2015-16. And this multidimensional poverty also based on the 3 dimensions: health, education and standard of living, as well as it consists with as many as 10 indicators. On the basis of these 10 indicators and 3 dimensions, Das et al., they measured the multidimensional poverty in our country. On the basis of the empirical facts of their estimation, we are able to analyze the trends of the multidimensional poverty in our country. If we consider the level of deprivation across different indicators, in their study they have considered 10 different indicators under 3 dimension. If we look into the level of deprivation across different indicators, then we can say that the deprivation was relatively higher in case of cooking fuel. That is 73.7% people were deprived in cooking fuel in the year 2004-5, which decreased to 57.7% in 2015-16. The level of deprivation also higher in case of sanitation, where deprivation also decreased from 69.4% to 50.6%. In case of nutrition indicators, the level of deprivation was 56.6%. That is, in 2005-6, as many as 56.6% people in our country were deprived in respect of nutrition. That is, they were malnourished. But their level of share also decreased from 56.6% to 37.2%. If you consider other indicators, then we can notice that the level of deprivation also decreased during this period. As a result, we can see that the headcount ratio, that is multidimensional headcount ratio, and intensity of the poverty as well as multidimensional poverty index also decreased during this period. If you consider multidimensional headcount ratio, then the multidimensional headcount ratio in all over India decreased from 54.9% in 2005-6 to 27.4% in 2015-16. If you consider the intensity of the multidimensional poverty means at what extent multidimensional poor people are deprived. Then this intensity of the multidimensional poverty also decreased during this period from 50.8% to 27.4%. As a result, the multidimensional poverty index, which is actually the product of H and A, that is product of multidimensional headcount ratio and multidimensional intensity of the poverty, the MPI also decreased from 0.279 to 0.119. There is no unit of MPI, it is unit free measure, it is actually index. Therefore, we can say that the value of multidimensional poverty index in India decreased from 0.279 to 0.119. Now, if you consider the multidimensional poverty, that is status of multidimensional poverty across social castes, then here we noticed that in 2005-6, as many as 80.2% ST people were multidimensionally poor. The figure is quite surprising. 80.2% ST people were multidimensionally poor in 2005-6, which decreased to 50% in 2015-16. That is almost half people, 50% people were multidimensionally poor in 2015-16 in our country. In case of SC, the multidimensional headcount ratio was 65.3% in 2005-6, which also decreased to 33% in 2015-16. Similarly, the multidimensional headcount ratio also decreased from OBC and general caste people during this period. In case of general caste people, the multidimensional headcount ratio was relatively low and it was 37.8%, which decreased to 16.1%. There was also the evidence of the reduction of the multidimensional intensity of the poverty as well as multidimensional poverty index. Now, if you consider the status of the poverty in respect of the religion across different religious group in our country, then from our estimation, it was observed that the multidimensional headcount ratio was relatively high for the Muslim community, and the figure was 59.9% in the year 2005-6. In case of Hindu, it was 50.3%. In case of Christian and Sikh, the level of multidimensional poverty were relatively low. In case of Christian, it was 37.3%. In case of Sikh, it was 42.3%. And there was also the evidence of the reduction of the multidimensional poverty in respect of intensity as well as multidimensional poverty index during this period across religion as well as across social castes. There was also the evidence of the measurement of the poverty in our country in respect of the multidimensional approach. NITI Aayog, National Institution of Transforming India, measured the multidimensional poverty in our country in the year 1921 by using the data of National Family Health Survey 4. That is, by using the National Family Health Survey 4 for the year 2015-16. NITI Aayog also estimated multidimensional poverty in our country. But in their estimation, they have also considered three dimensions, education, health and standard of living, but the indicators were slightly different compared to the other indicators, that is indicator that considered by the Das et al. On the basis of the 12 indicators, NITI Aayog measured the multidimensional poverty in our country. And if you consider the estimation of the multidimensional poverty by NITI Aayog for the year 2015-16, then we can say that 25.01% people were multidimensionally poor in India, whereas the intensity of the poverty was 47.13% and multidimensional poverty index was 0.118 in 2015-16. But by using this methodology, we are not able to analyze the trend of the multidimensional poverty because NITI Aayog only measured the multidimensional poverty for the year 2015-16. And if we consider the level of multidimensional poverty across states of India, then we noticed that the multidimensional poverty was relatively high in case of Bihar, followed by Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Nagaland and Assam. And all these states witnessed the multidimensional poverty more than 30%. That is multidimensional poverty quite high in these states in our country. There is also the evidence of the measurement of the poverty following the social exclusion approach. The socio-economic caste census 2011 made by Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India is an example of the measurement of the poverty by social exclusion approach. In socio-economic caste census, they have measured the level of deprivation on the basis of different criteria. And accordingly, they are able to discriminate one group of household from another group of household. There was the provision of three group of household. First one is the automatically excluded group, automatically included group, and other deprived household. On the basis of a number of indicators, socio-economic caste census able to identify a group of household who are automatically excluded to get different social welfare benefit. Side by side, on the basis of 5 indicators, socio-economic caste census able to identify the automatically included household who are actually poorest of the poor, and they are eligible to get the social protection benefit or welfare measures from the government. The rest of the household are treated as the others group, and they are also categorized on the basis of their level of deprivation on the basis of the 8 indicators. That is, in our country, there was the evidence of the measurement of the poverty following the monetary approach, multidimensional approach, and social exclusion approach. If we consider monetary poverty and multidimensional poverty in our country, then we can say that both monetary poverty as well as multidimensional poverty gradually decreased over time. But there are some sections in our society like scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and Muslim, they actually witnessed relatively high level of poverty. Therefore, effective policy implementation are important to overcome the poverty of this group of people. It is true, government already introduced a number of social protection program, number of government measures to overcome the status of the poverty of different section of the society. But if you consider different segments of the population in our country, specifically scheduled tribes, scheduled castes and minority, then they actually witnessed very high level of poverty. Therefore, effective implementation of the poverty is very, very important to overcome the problem of poverty from our country. In the next module, we actually discuss the status of inequality in India.